Hey guys, welcome back. So today we have another episode of the State of the Second, and we have a special guest, Phil from GOA, and I'd like to welcome him to the show. Phil, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Outstanding, man. It's always good to have you guys on to, help have these conversations with regards to what legislation we face, or in this case, what, BATF DOJ actions we face. But first, let's talk about something that is of particular interest to me, which has the potential to be perhaps as big as the Heller decision, and that's a recent decision by the Supreme Court to take up a case out of New York with regards to concealed carry and the ability of New York citizens to defend themselves outside of their homes with a firearm. Can you kind of give us a breakdown on what this case is all about and what it means for the Second Amendment community as a whole?
Sure. I think it's really important to understand this case within the larger context of two other really important Supreme Court cases. Obviously, everybody knows about McDonald and Heller, right? And to cut to the chase on those two, it's obvious to you, me, everybody watching. It's even obvious to a lot of folks in the Supreme Court that lower courts have not been interpreting those two court cases faithfully. Okay, so we've had more than 10 years, about 10 years of the lower courts basically ignoring or trying to smooth the rough edges from their perspective of those two important cases, rather than reading what the justices said or wrote and then interpreting them as lower courts should. Right? We all understand that the Supreme Court, for legal matters of constitutional questions, are one of the avenues for us to determine, what the law should be and whether or not it's faithful to the Constitution. Unfortunately, the lower courts have not done that, and for those of us who have been paying attention, Justice Thomas has been taking every opportunity he has had to remind the court, to remind the public that the Supreme Court made these two important decisions and they have not been faithfully followed by the lower courts. So now we have this case out of New York. And so basically, as everybody knows, New York is a may issue state. There's a handful of states that do have may issue. And so this case might have some important implications for those states as well. And when it comes to New York, some people who aren't in the know may think that may issue means you have to have a good reason, right? But there are a lot of instances of somebody having their home robbed, of owning a store that they get assaulted, or they have a stalker and they don't get the permissions for a may issue. Why is that? Because they're not wealthy, they're not politically connected, they're not famous. Celebrities, they can get these may issue permits very easily because they're in the know. But guys like you and me, we've got to go through the process. And there are actual documented cases of people who say, I have a stalker. My house has been robbed. I live in a dangerous area, and they can't get the may issue. So the four justices on the court decided to take up this case. GOA is also going to be offering up some amicus briefs to this case to help the justices make their decision. And so, we've got a couple really good ones that, we think are faithful to the Constitution. Obviously, living legend, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is going to be part of this. You have Alito, Barrett, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch. We're pretty sure that group there understands what the Second Amendment is, shall not be infringed. The words on the page, they mean what they say. Then you got a guy on the outlier there, Roberts, who, Bush appointees. He's always been sort of a thorn in the side for lots of different issues, in particular the Second Amendment. So what we're really hoping for is that the court is going to take the opportunity to, clean up some of these questions on concealed carry. Now, the thing that your viewers need to be watching out for, and everybody else who's, a GOA member needs to be watching out for, is how broad or how narrow is this case, is this final opinion, assuming it goes in the right direction. How broad or how narrow is it going to go, right? Do they stick to just very specific facts of the case, as when they took up the case, they seem to indicate they might want to? Or does someone, hopefully a Justice Thomas or, Barrett or, Kavanaugh, decide to maybe broaden it a little bit to expand this to, also sorts of other related issues with regards to concealed carry, firearms, Second Amendment. So that really remains to be seen. But, at the end of the day, this is excellent that 10 years since the last big gun case, we're finally seeing some action from the court at the at the prodding of Justice Thomas.
And I think a lot of us in our community kind of view the fact that the SCOTUS has taken up this case as a positive thing, because it means most likely that they have a problem, as you mentioned earlier, with lower court rulings and decisions. Generally, if the Supreme Court doesn't have an issue with the lower court's actions, they just don't hear the case, lower court's rulings stand, and that's law. So the fact that the Supreme Court has taken this up seems to signal that they do have a problem with the way, like you said, the McDonald and Heller cases have been implemented by the lower courts, and they have something to say about it. So generally, it looks like it probably will be decided in our favor. And like you said, it depends on the scope, just how narrowly they focus their ruling or how broadly they do it. Because if they decide as they should, as we believe they should, then all 50 states should be shall issue. And just so our viewers know the difference, I think you described may issue fairly well. Shall issue states, like the state where I live, when I apply for a concealed carry permit, the state is obligated to give me one unless they can show reasons why that I am not able to be given a permit. And that means I have to have been charged with a felony or, domestic abuse or something like that. They have to be able to prove a legal reason why they're denying me the right to carry a concealed firearm. So the majority of states are shall issue, but we have states like New York and California and other states that are may issue, where, as you said, if you're politically connected, if you're a politician, if you're a celebrity, oh yeah, guns for everybody. But if you're just a regular person, just trying to protect themselves, their families, their property, their businesses, not so much. If you don't know the right people, you're not connected, you don't know which palms to grease, or you don't have the money to grease those palms, you're just left out in the cold, and the Second Amendment no longer applies to you. It only applies to the oligarchy. So, yeah, I think this is potentially a pretty big decision. And if is Clarence Thomas kind of championing this? Wasn't he part of the judges that decided to actually hear this case? Wasn't he part of that group?
That's right. Yeah, he's if you read some of his court cases in the last, let's say, 5 years or so, especially in the last year and a half, I've been seeing a lot of needling to the other justices when they have refused to take up a Second Amendment case. He's always had his own opinion. It's opinion in the dissent or whatever they call it when they decided not to take up a case. Say, look, guys, it's been a long time since we dealt with the Second Amendment. It's time to do it. Not only does it need for us to sort of comment on this as justices, but also the lower courts. Not only are they not interpreting it as we would have preferred, they are outright ignoring what we did, 10 plus years ago in those two cases. So he's the bellwether here. He's the guy to watch, which is why we really should be crossing our fingers and, quite frankly, making noise that we'd like a good Second Amendment, I wouldn't say advocate, but a person who understands what the Constitution is about to have the pen on this. What you wouldn't want is for somebody who's bad on the Second Amendment to side with the majority and write that opinion, because then they might, let's say, make it a little bit more narrow. Also, you made a really important point just now, which is, where I live, it only recently became a shall issue district, right? But even when it becomes shall issue, the bureaucracy, the mayors, the sheriffs, they can still try to make it as difficult as possible for a person to get their concealed carry permit, right? It's not like you can just walk into the police department and get it. And so the reason I bring that up is, let's say best case scenario, this case goes our way. Thomas writes just an opinion that's absolute fire, takes down all of the other may issue states, and we're just throwing our hands up in the air and jumping for joy. That still needs to be implemented by the localities. And so we always need to be vigilant that even if this goes our way, there's still the anti-gun bureaucrats, especially like where I live, they're going to want to throw up roadblocks, which is why this is sort of ancillary, but you're going to want to be, engaged in your local politics as well, to make sure that the people who are in those offices are faithful to, that shall issue ruling if that's where this goes.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, Illinois was the last of the 50 states to actually adopt a concealed carry law, and they were drug kicking and screaming through the courts to do it. and they weren't happy about being forced into doing it. So now all 50 states have some sort of concealed carry. I believe we're up to 20 states now with constitutional carry, which means you don't have to request permission from the king to carry a firearm. You're, as a citizen of that state, you're entitled to carry a firearm, concealed, in some states even openly, and no permits required. And I think that's obviously where all 50 states should be, but it's a gradual process of us getting there and winning court case after court case. And I think we've had a pretty good track record. A lot of folks in our community have been defeatist, and it was a blow when Biden got into office, given all of his anti-gun promises that he wanted to make. But even despite him and his best efforts, we're still holding on to the filibuster. We still have court cases going our way, and I'm assuming that this one will. I hope I'm not wrong. But, I think the important point to drive home here, and I do this in all of our conversations, but it's critical. Your voice does matter. It does matter if you contact your representatives. It does matter if you're politically active and attend rallies and get involved in grassroots organizations and support groups like GOA, who fight for us on the Hill and lobby. And if you don't like lobbyists, you just have to get used to the idea that they exist. And we want our own, and we want GOA up there on the Hill doing that for us, because there's no compromise. So I just want folks to know that, I think that this is probably a good thing, in my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion. I think it's probably a good thing that they took this court case up, and hopefully it'll be another big victory for us that, kind of solidifies the fact that the Second Amendment does in fact guarantee a individual right to self-preservation, self-defense, and everything that goes along with that. So do you think, I know you probably hate to speculate, but what's your thoughts on the reason the court took this up? Do you think that's a positive outcome is likely?
Well, look, at the end of the day, I do think it is because there are enough good justices on the court that recognize the lower courts are not being faithful to those other two rulings. I think Justice Thomas is an incredibly persuasive member of the court. He's incredibly well respected. And, quite frankly, a lot of good members who represent good Americans who support the Second Amendment, some of those members recognize that, or some of those justices recognize that these members fought like dogs to get them on the court, despite all of the awful vitriol that was thrown at them.
Whether Thomas especially, I remember those hearings. I mean,
yeah.
And Biden was one of the worst people when they were attacking him. They weren't asking him questions; they were attacking him.
Yeah. I'm not sure that a lot of your audience is old enough to remember what that was like, but they can go back on YouTube and watch it.
Yeah.
You think that what happened with Kavanaugh or less so with Barrett and a little bit with Gorsuch was bad. I mean, that's where it really started, and you can go even further back to Bork. But what happened to Thomas, to a good, decent man, family man, was absolutely disgusting. And he has a lot of weight in the court, and so they recognize it's time to update the law. And in part, you and I talked about this last time we spoke. The Congress hasn't acted, and that really is where the change needs to occur. I'm happy to have it in the courts. I think it's an absolute unmitigated positive that the Supreme Court has decided to take up this case from New York, but the Congress hasn't acted, which is really where the long-term, long-standing, legitimate, truly democratically legitimate decisions are made. But I will 100% take the Supreme Court determining whether or not state laws are violating the Constitution or not. This is a great thing that the Supreme Court has done. We should all be extremely happy just for this one step.
Yep, I agree. All right, so another thing I wanted to chat with you while I have you is a lot of folks are talking about the ATF appointee for the directorship, and Chipman, and obviously his involvement with Waco back in the day. Obviously, he's made many public statements. He's rabidly anti-gun. What's going on with his appointment, and how do you see that shaking out possibly?
There's a lot of apathy in Congress and Washington, D.C. in general. I actually think this is going to be a bigger fight than I had anticipated only a few weeks ago. And that has to do with, as public as Chipman has been on his anti-gun stance, that's going to attract a lot of attention. So, for instance, there are a lot of nominees that have gone through Congress that most of us never hear about. We sort of hear about them because we're here in Washington, sort of in the belly of the beast, but they don't make national attention. I think because Chipman has been so vocal in his anti-gun views, his work in the anti-gun community, and as you said, his awful presence at Waco and what he did there, and everything he's done and said since then. And quite frankly, just being wrong on so many issues and all of his testimonies before Congress in the past, I think this is going to be a bigger fight. It's sort of surprising me how it's shaping up. People that I didn't think would be attracted to this are, because they recognize there's an opportunity here to make an important point that, we cannot allow an actual anti-gun zealot to lead the ATF.
Right. The DOJ, ATF is put out for comment, and I want to ask everybody to follow a link I'll put in the video description below to go comment on this. But how the process works, we've talked about this before in other cases, but the DOJ, ATF is proposing a rule change. What they're actually proposing is a law change. They want to rewrite the law. And they put this out on for comments for 30 days, which any American citizen can go and comment. And if you do follow the link and comment, please be polite, respectful, short, concise, and to the point. But after that comment period, then the ATF gets to decide whether or not it's going to move forward with this rule change, or in my opinion, law rewrite. Now, what's interesting here, and I would love to hear you speak to this, Phil, is we've won this argument already. GOA filed a lawsuit about bump stocks, and in that decision from the Sixth Circuit said, ATF, you cannot rewrite law, that's the domain of Congress, and claim Chevron deference. And to keep it kind of short, Chevron deference is, in part, what it means is that when a law is passed, there may be some ambiguity to the law. It's handed to a federal agency to enforce this law, and they're given some discretion on how to interpret the law, and that's done under deference. But when an agency like ATF goes out, changes their interpretation of the law, basically rewrites law, and then assigns criminal penalties to people for things that were previously legal, the Sixth Circuit said, you can't do that. You can't claim Chevron deference and do this. You cannot go back and retroactively impose serious criminal penalties upon people for something that was previously legal to purchase. So I'm curious what your thoughts on that are, Phil.
Yeah, and this is why the GOA case on bump stocks is so important, and why that win was so monumental, is it has so many far-reaching effects that people are still figuring out, will be figuring out for years to come. As you said, the Chevron deference, huge. It's one of the biggest hurdles we have to reining in so much of the power in Washington. Now, with regards to Second Amendment issues, we're gonna see how that case sort of plays out with all of this. But yes, absolutely, they know, and we know, and everybody watching knows that this Sixth Circuit case that got bumped down to a lower court, should have some application here. Mm-hmm. But we've known that this rule, and let's not forget, when the ATF says we're proposing a rule, let's realize what that is. And you said it perfectly. It's law. It's law by another way, and nobody should ever forget that. If you get dinged, in your home state for violating one of these ATF rules, you don't get to use it as a defense. In most cases, putting aside the bump stock ruling we just had. But you don't get to say, sorry, it's not a law passed by Congress. I'm not subject to that because I'm only subject to laws passed by Congress, as much as we would all like that to be the case. Right. This is law, and you and I and everybody watching is going to be held to that standard. The problem is the obvious problem, is that we elect our representatives to pass these laws. What they end up doing in so many cases, and this is why these bureaucracies think that they have so much power here, is the law is written in such a way as they say something like, the secretary of this agency shall determine, what happens, in this very ambiguous scenario. Basically, They're saying, we're going to give you the bones of the law, but you secretary, you bureaucrat, you get to fill in sort of the muscle. And that's a big problem here. And that's what's going on with these 80% lowers, but even more so because the law on these things, we read them as fairly clear. as far as what is and is not a firearm. But what these agents are doing, and we've talked about this before, you and I, and also at GOA, is that they're going in and they're really reaching to find new interpretations of 80% lower. So this just isn't the normal bad stuff of the law is ambiguous. The law is not extremely well written, obviously, but they're going in and they're digging down even further to really shoehorn in these extra regulations that they have, and that now we've got only a few weeks to notice and comment on.
Yep, and kind of go to your point, so perhaps the viewers, might not fully understand what we're talking about here. So a perfect example of the ambiguity of a law. Let's take a look at the Gun Control Act of 1968 and the Sporting Purposes Clause, right? So when you hand that sporting purpose clause to the ATF gets to go, okay, well, what's sporting? Well, it has to have a safety and be of a certain weight to be an importable handgun. And they just get to make that up out of thin air because there's no guidance within the law. So the ATF has said, okay, you have to make sure that every firearm sold or imported into the United States is of sporting purpose. But they don't define in any great detail what sporting purposes is, or what defines a sporting firearm. So ATF gets to make that up out of whole cloth. And that's how they make laws. And that's how we get arbitrary things like barrels from machine guns cannot be imported because they were once attached to a machine gun, as if a barrel converts a firearm from semi-automatic to fully automatic. It doesn't. It's a barrel. It doesn't do anything except push a projectile down it. Yeah. But that's where the ATF can bend things so much that it's absolutely absurd, and we need to rein these agencies in, and that's all done, again, under that Chevron deference. So with the 80% lowers, what are they trying to do with the lowers? Are they trying to make it so that if you want to manufacture your own firearm, which is something Americans have been able to do since the founding of our nation, now you have to go to a licensed dealer and have it engraved with a serial number and then transfer it to yourself on a 4473 form? What is it that they're pushing for with this rule change or new law?
Well, the hobby actually goes back, it's older than the Republic itself, right? Making guns at home is something that's just it's a human instinct, right? To want to make things that protect yourself, right? So let's everybody remember that. It's older than the country itself. But yeah, in sum, this ATF, let's just call it what it is, ATF law would essentially do away with the home-built gun hobby, right? You'd have to get it serialized. You got to get a background check. And for those of you who aren't paying attention, background check in a world where Chipman is the ATF director, let's say you accidentally, or for whatever reason, you get a false positive and you fail that background check, he's actually said he wants people arrested on the spot for that. So that's sort of a separate question. I don't know how that would be executed or not. Yeah. But it's totally crazy. But yeah, we're talking serialization, we're talking background checks, and this has implications much bigger than just the home guns, where it wants to redefine a frame or receiver, it wants to redefine gunsmith, it wants to redefine all these things to essentially do away with the homemade gun market for one simple reason. They want to know where all the guns are, right? Yep. I want to call everybody's attention to, it's a little bit dry, but if you can get through it, you'll be better for it. There was a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday, led by a very anti-gun senator from Connecticut. Thankfully, we all had Senators Ted Cruz and Mike Lee, who were asking a lot of really good questions. But this goes to your point about the sporting purposes and what that means, and it has to be of a certain weight, and barrels, that doesn't make sense why that's regulated. It is so obvious if you watch that 2-hour hearing, and we're going to be talking about this over at GOA pretty soon. It is so obvious these anti-gunners in Congress know nothing about, forget the Second Amendment, which is obvious that they know nothing. They know nothing about guns. Here's a great example. The anti-gun senator put up 2 pictures. One was a fully functioning handgun made from a 80% lower after milling and adding a barrel and all that stuff, and trigger group and all that. The other was sort of a firearm you could buy in a gun store. And the question was, can you tell the difference between these two? Which is the one made from a 80% lower, and which is the one bought in a gun store? And I'm watching it, I'm thinking, yeah, I can. Because, like, I know what, a Polymer 80 looks like versus a Glock.
Right.
Like, it's just as obvious as between night and day. But that just goes to show that to him, they're the same thing. right?
Yeah.
Those two things are exactly the same. There's no difference. So he was asking a rhetorical question to make a point. But the gun community, people who are involved in this, we all know the difference. So it just goes to show that a little bit of education, and you're not making so many dumb mistakes with regards to things like you were talking about, barrels and sporting purposes. You actually have an appreciation for what it means for the home gunsmith to want to fabricate, his own gun, using his own tools.
Yeah. And we've been able to make firearms, like you said, before we were founded, but since the beginning of our nation, we've always been able to make firearms. There's nothing nefarious about making a firearm. I remember my uncle as a kid, he built black powder firearms from kits, but they would give a rough stock blank and basically a barrel, but then you would have to fit the lock work and either blue or brown the metal components, fit the stock to the action of the firearm and things like that. This is a long-standing American tradition, even when you go up to polymer 80 lowers for AR-15s. There's nothing nefarious about a rifle that loads itself. It's 2021. Of course firearms load themselves, but these anti-gunners want to take all guns away, but they want to put us back into the Stone Ages of firearm ownership, and all based on lies and misinformation. So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. So if this goes through the comment period and then ATF comes up with some rule change that grossly infringes on Americans' rights, is GOA discussing taking legal action once again, or is that a possibility? Or you guys don't want to signal what your next move might be? We have to sort of figure out what the next move might be. But we were there for bump stock. We were there for all the big cases. So I'll let that sort of speak for itself. But yeah, this is a huge issue. So I don't think we're going to sit on the sidelines for this one. This one's it's too important. It's too big, because it's too far-reaching. Yeah,
right.
I agree.
At what point does a block of wood not become, a gun? And the big point here, this can't be stopped. 3D printing, right? I know. You can 3D print just paperweights if you want. Fun stuff for your kids, or you can tinker with that. It's like I said this the other day. It's like ham radio, right? People like to tinker with things. So how are you going to stop you're going to outlaw 3D printers? I don't think so. Right. They may try or regulate them. And there's already been big court cases about the information for the you can't stop the signal, right? The information, the data to 3D print a lower, that's speech, right?
Absolutely,
it is. You can get these sorts of things in libraries as well. That is as American as it comes, right? Being able to speak. If you can't speak freely, then you can't think clearly, and you can't get an opinion out there. So that's pretty well protected. And so this whole idea of banning these lowers, it cannot be stopped. And on some level, I want to believe they know that, but they want to go down this rabbit hole of doing that. Well, they're already behind the 8 ball, because we're moving on.
Yep. Well, we already have cases decided in our favor, but if they push this issue and it goes back to court, if GOA takes action in the Sixth Circuit again, I'm within that district. I'll volunteer once again to be a plaintiff, because we have to stop this type of action. And I think the Sixth Circuit, if it went back there, they would take a look at the ruling we already got with the issue of bump stocks and say, hey, this is the exact same thing, guys. No, you can't do this. But anyway, I don't want to digress too much on that either. So we'll just wait and see what happens. But I urge everybody, please, to go to the comments section and make a comment and let the government know, let the ATF and DOJ know that you're opposed to this proposed rule change. And then we'll see how that plays out. Now, I also know that they're talking about doing something similar with braces, but there's nothing out there yet. There's no proposed changes, certainly nothing proposed and changes. And once something goes from the comments period and it's approved and adopted, then it winds up on the Federal Register. And then at that point, you can make a decision whether or not you're going to take legal action or not. Right now, you can't take legal action against a proposed rule change. You can only take action once something actually takes place. So GOA, I assume, is keeping an eye on what's going on with the braces as well.
Absolutely. We're operating in all these different spaces, and nothing gets by us.
I know you guys have been amazing, and I'm very blessed to have been a part of the bump stock lawsuit. I felt very strongly about that, and you guys are doing the Lord's work out there, because you don't compromise. Of all the pro rights gun groups out there, when looking at GOA going back 40 plus years, there's never been a compromise offered by GOA. It's steadfast. We're done dealing with our rights, just stop taking them. We're going to fight for every inch. And I love that about the GOA. Phil, also, you're the host of the Minuteman, or the Minuteman Minute, correct?
The Minuteman Moment.
Minuteman Moment. I always want to call it the Minuteman Minute. I don't know why I keep screwing that up, but the Minuteman Moment, which is a great episodic show that you have on the GOA's YouTube channel. Folks, please swing by. I'll put a link down below so you guys can check that out. It's a great, short, brief, update to what's taking place currently politically in Washington, D.C., and it's of great value, and it's easily shared, so you can put it on your Facebook posts and elsewhere, so you can share it with your friends, and it can get that information out there so people can take political action, which, again, is ever so critical. So, Phil, before we wrap things up, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about before we finish up today?
I'm really grateful for the time to speak with you today. I'll say if anybody swings by the Minuteman Moment page on the GOA channel, go down to the comments and, let us know if there's something you'd like us to cover. We're always happy to do that. There's a lot of content out there, a lot of stuff happening in Washington, and so we're spreading the message. But if there's something specific you think we should be touching on, let me know.
All right. Yeah, that's great. And guys, please swing by gunowners.org, and that's to the GOA. You can sign up for free email alerts, and in those alerts, it's not going to be a bunch of stuff, coming at you every single day saying buy a t-shirt. These email alerts are going to give you important information and give you links so you can be politically active. And if you own a firearm, guys, you need to take on the fight. It's that firearm you purchased comes with baggage, and that baggage is you need to fight for our rights. So please sign up for those email alerts at a minimum, but also become a member of GOA. You can do it either monthly like I do, which I believe they call Patriot membership. I donate every month, but you can do an annual membership, and you can also become a life member. So I urge you guys to do that. All right, Phil, well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We greatly appreciate you doing that. And guys, again, swing by and check out gunowners.org. And thank you for 13 years of support, and we'll talk to you guys soon.